Hi everybody, my name is Karen Hall. Welcome to today's webinar. I am the Senior Community Manager at Catalyst, so some of you may know me or know my face, and for some of you might just know my email address, or you've had a chat over the phone. So you're really welcome to today's webinar. Really glad you could be with us. So we are just going to make a start. Hope everybody's getting there. Catalyst we did one of these last week on finance, and this was the other topic that we were talking to members and on company and programs, that this was another area of concern that people had. The recruitment staff and managing remote teams were all having to work remotely and work differently, but also all those changes that have happened in our work environments as well. So around employment, recruitment, a lot of us are dealing with having to put people on to furlough and trying to work out different ways to manage our staff and our businesses over the next wee while. So we hope you're all keeping well, and that all your families are keeping well as well. So we have a brilliant panel with us. We're going to kick off. I'm going to introduce the rest of the panel in a wee while, but we're going to kick off with Martina McAuley from HR team. HR team are actually a member company up in our Northwest campus, so it's really good to have the Northwest represented here today, and one of other panelists as well. So I'll introduce the rest of the panelists a wee bit later on. So Martina's going to do a presentation, then we're going to have a bit of a discussion with the panel, and then it'll be your opportunity to do the Q&A. So the Q&A box is at the bottom of your screen. So if there's anything that comes up as we're talking, just pop your question in there, and we'll get to those Q&As at the last part of it. Anything we don't get answered today, we will come back to you, and some of the guys in the panels will jump in and answer questions if they can as we're going along. So I'm going to hand over to Martina. Martina, do you want to do a wee bit of an introduction to yourself? And then I'll hopefully get the share screen to work with your slide deck.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Karen. So I myself, my name, as Karen has said, is Martina McAuley. I am a director of HR team. We're based in the Northwest, although we have offices in Dublin as well. So the types of queries and that we're going to deal with today, and the types of issues, is something we would be asked about quite regularly in the HR team. However, in the last fortnight, it's something that we've been asked about daily. Homeworking in this current climate is something that nearly every organisation, every client company of ours has had to look at and had to adapt to quite quickly. So we're going to look at that today, and how to manage a remote workforce and how to keep them motivated, especially in this extremely difficult time. It's quite difficult in normal circumstances if you have regular home workers, but in this circumstances it's even more difficult because we're putting into the mix maybe, for example, there's other people at home with the home worker, such as children or people they share their accommodation with. So there's all these things in the mix, and how do you as the employer deal with that? We'll also look briefly at how to retain your staff. It's something that has come up once our clients got over the initial shock of everything that's happened. No one was expecting this to be quite how it turned out, and once we got over the initial shock of it, the other thing we're looking at is how do we retain employees in this current climate? What can we do to look at retention? And finally, something that isn't cropping up as much, but there are some organisations that are looking at recruitment, and how do you do that in this current climate? So we'll touch briefly on that. If at the end we still have some time left, I will go through furloughing. That's the _1 query that we have been tasked with in the last fortnight, is how do you look at temporary laying off part or all of your workforce, and what is this new furloughing scheme that has been brought in by the government to assist organisations. So we just move to the first slide, and in terms of what we're actually going to look at. We're going to look at home working. We're going to look at how to actually manage your workforce from home, employee performance and motivation. And that's key. It's really key in normal circumstances, but it's even more essential now, because your workforce are under extreme pressure. People are concerned about their employment in the long term, and how things are going to be when we get out of this crisis, because it will pass. And we're also going to look at how do you retain employees and keep that goodwill. We've been asked a number of times over the last fortnight, if I temporarily lay off my employees, and I have to, the organisation has no choice in order to survive, then what do I need to do to ensure that they are still a motivated workforce when they come back? And then again, as I said, in the recruitment. So we'll just move on now to the second point. And what do you need to consider for homework? And so when we're looking at homework and considerations, we're looking at the practicalities here first. So it's in terms of, from an employment law perspective, what we would recommend. Homework and policy. A policy isn't something, normally when we mention employment law and we mention policies, everyone gets a little bit anxious. They feel that this is a rule book, if you like. It's not. It's setting the boundaries, so there's clarity for all parties, both for the employee and the employer. In terms of a homework and policy, think of it as providing those boundaries to your staff so that they have a clear understanding. Statistically, from a motivational perspective, one of the key ways to keep your employees motivated is providing clarity on their job role, and also having very clear expectations of what's expected of them on a weekly and a daily basis. And you find that from the homework and policy. So what type of things should be in there? The hours of work, what's the provision for lunch breaks, those small things that may be forgotten about from a homework when someone's working remotely. Other things such as who's pays for the internet? Does the organisation want to make a contribution to that? So, and make sure that you provide the relevant equipment for the employee to do their job. There is a requirement from the organisation. Normally, if someone was working from home, you would send someone out from a health and safety perspective to ensure that the ergonomics, how they're actually set up, is correct. However, the HSE have made an announcement yesterday, I believe it was, to state that for this temporary period of time, you do not have to look at the workplace and how it is facilitated. So that's just something to be mindful of. Check liability insurance. So it's those small things, the practicalities that we would say around homework, and is the first thing that you should do before we look at how we get into motivating our employees. So we just move to the next slide then. So in terms of how to ensure that motivation during homework, and so one thing that we would say, and you'll see me touch on this throughout this morning's webinar, is in terms of those expectations, something that we have devised in HR teams, what we call a BET system, and that's whether an employee is in the workplace for you or if they're remote working, is having that clarity. What's the basic standards? What's the expectations? So the E of the job role, and then T targets, having a look at what's to be achieved on a weekly and monthly basis. It gives great clarity to both management and employees, and especially if you're home working. Previously, prior to working and setting up HR team, I worked in retail for a large German retailer, and I looked after the north and the west of Ireland. So those teams, my teams, you couldn't see them on a daily basis. So it was completely remote, if you like, in terms of how to manage those managers on a daily basis. So Throughout this morning, I will touch on some of those things that I have learned over time on how to actually manage people when you can't see them there in front of you on a daily basis, and how to keep their motivation up, especially if they're working from home. So ensure that employees are clear on the expectations. So what's required on a daily basis? The first thing I would say in order to do that is have a daily meeting with the employees, preferably first thing in the morning, preferably on a platform, a video conferencing platform such as this, Zoom, or whatever platform you want to use, preferably with the video on. It gives that feeling of being connected. It keeps the employees engaged whilst home working. There is a perception sometimes that if an individual is working from home, they won't be working quite as hard as if they were working within the actual office environment. That has been proven to be incorrect. It's the management that needs to come into play and giving the employees those boundaries. It's also important to ensure that you're providing employees. So if there's with regular breaks as well, there's still employment law in place when someone's working from the home, and they should get those regular breaks. So make sure we know when someone's taking that. It's not that they might be leaving their home to go anywhere, but it's important that they still get an uninterrupted break. So now is an ideal time also to review job descriptions. What is there clear expectations from your employees, and do they understand? When we're looking at motivating employees in general, job expectations are key. If you look at any, for example, football team or any team sport, everyone within that team has a clear job role. They do not overlap. Sometimes in the workforce, what we see is in the absence of job roles, you see players, if you like, overlap, what you wouldn't see in a team sport. And if that happens, that's when things fall between two stools, or you've individuals doing the same job. And that's what causes things to become unproductive. If you're working from home, it's even more important to have clear job descriptions. Individuals can't talk to each other across an office and ask who's looking after this task. So it's very important to be very clear. Set specific and measurable targets and review these regularly. So again, if you're look at your productivity, look at what the targets are for your individuals. If you're working on a caseload, what's the expectations in terms of that being completed? So look at that target throughout. That's not to apply pressure to the employee. That's in order to provide clarity to both management and staff. Track productivity using relevant systems. So the better systems that you have set up for individuals to operate remotely, the more successful that will be. So in the past and currently, what we do in our own organisation is we have a very clear internal computer system where we can log on and see who's working on a specific task for a client. It doesn't have to be a computer system. It can be Excel, shared remotely. There's lots of different platforms and technologies out there so that everyone is clear what is happening and who's responsible for what. Discuss the progress at the end of the day. That can be via email, it can be via telephone, it can be via video conference, whatever suits. As long as you get, I would recommend at least one video call with the employees a day. And ask for an end of day report or summary on the progress. That really assists the employee as well in keeping a track for themselves of what is happening. So we just move to the next slide. And what we're going to look at is the top tips for avoiding employees becoming demotivated whilst working from home. The number one thing that I've touched on already is that face-to-face communication. Everyone needs some type of interaction within the workplace. If employees are left to work from home and, for example, only get email communication on a daily basis or a weekly basis, that's when things could start to go wrong for organisations. So definitely have that face-to-face communication. We just move to the next tip then in terms of using that communication via Zoom, and then in terms of stopping individuals becoming demotivated. they need to be able to get answers to questions quickly. So for example, if you have someone working on a particular issue for a client and they can't get the answer from a manager quite quickly. So if you're in an office environment, someone might be able to knock on the manager's door, they might be able to get that answer quite quickly. If they can't get that, and it causes that bottleneck, the employee can get extremely frustrated and extremely demotivated. For example, in the HR team this week, our employees are working, some of them are working from home, working remotely, and there's a huge shift in legislation both north and south of the border in terms of all the different schemes that's available for employees on a temporary layoff. If our employees couldn't get access to us to clarify information, that could make their job extremely difficult and extremely frustrating. So we'll just move to the next one in terms of that employees staying motivated. So distractions at home, this is something that's come up a lot because the current climate, there are no childcare, there's no childcare provisions. If you have individuals working from home, what's your take on that? My advice would be reasonable, be very reasonable with individuals. If you're having video calls such as this, just ask anyone that's not speaking to put their mic on mute in case there is distractions in the background. Under normal circumstances, you wouldn't expect that to be the case, but these are not normal circumstances. Be very reasonable with your employees because these are the individuals that you're going to need when we come out the other end of this and this pandemic passes. So be very reasonable because there could be distractions at home. How do you support home working then? So in terms of supporting home working, it's providing that daily structure. So however you do that will depend on your own internal culture. But to give you an example of what we would recommend is look at those basic standards. So if you're having that meeting in the morning, what's the basic standard? So that if your organisation, for example, is receiving inbound calls, who's looking after that? Who's looking after emails? Who's looking after, if you're breaking it down per client, when's individuals taking breaks? Exactly the same as you would do if you were in the workplace. Look at the expectations then of the job roles that everyone is doing, and what's the targets? When do you expect someone to have a project or a customer report, whatever it might be, completed by? And this one's key, provide opportunities for remote networking with fellow employees. There's lots of different platforms as well that you can use for having group chats, if you like, outside of maybe what will be regular work talk. This is the thing statistically that's up there for individuals that work from home that they find hardest is the lack of social interaction. That as it's known sometimes in business terms, the water cooler chat. So they don't have that. They don't have a cup of coffee in the morning with their work colleagues. Something that we have done ourselves is if we're having a coffee break, we might have that in the early morning. We'll invite all the team that's remote working to have that coffee break at the same time. We try not to talk about work as if we do it as if we were in the workplace. So everyone has their coffee and they have that bit of a social element because that statistically is the hardest thing for employees. And then you can have those chats, WhatsApp, whatever it might be. From an employment law perspective, because we always have to look at employment law, just be careful that nobody's saying anything derogatory or discriminatory on any of those forums. And provide encouragement and regular feedback. This is huge for employees that don't normally work from home. They're faced with, and everyone, if everyone on here is working from home that doesn't normally, then you're faced with a huge shift in what's normal for you. So be reasonable with individuals. Just move to the next slide now. This is something that we look at outside of even home working, is how to actually build performance management. This is something that I have lived by throughout my career, and it actually it actually does work. How to build, and you can see there at the top of the triangle, performance management. Sometimes performance management is gauged as an appraisal. It's not, it's day-to-day management of employees. And as long as somebody has clear expectations of their job role, they're accountable for what they're doing within their job role. And the key is, if they get regular feedback, they will achieve. And the key is regular feedback. That doesn't have, I don't mean negative feedback, I mean constructive, so someone understands when they're doing something right, and also if they need to receive some constructive feedback on how to improve on something that they've done previously. If you live by this, you'll be successful in terms of homeworking. So we just move on to the next slide. And what we've just looked at here is the reasons for lack of motivation and underperformance during homework. And sometimes we presume that it's those distractions. It's what's happening in the workplace, you know, or sorry, in the home place. There's washings, there's houses to be tidied, there's maybe children there. That's actually, if you look, it's actually, we've highlighted that in red. Outside influences is actually not the reason. That comes last on the list for why individuals don't perform whilst homework. And the actual main reasons, if you look, is that there are no clear expectations. There's a poor job design. They've got ineffective training on how they actually work from home. And I know that it could be very difficult to provide training in advance of individuals working at home at present. However, you can do online training. There's an unsuitable organisation or reporting structure. There's a lack of clarity, ineffective or no communication, and lack of reward and motivation, and again, insufficient performance feedback. So that gives you some of the reasons as to why individuals don't perform at home, and outside influences is way down the list. So we just move on to the next. I put this in here. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but it outlines what I would suggest, and what we do when we have a long training session is to I would say print this out if you don't know how to give feedback, and follow it any time that you are giving feedback to an individual. It allows you to state your purpose and describe the problem. So if you look at these steps, if you don't know how to give feedback or you struggle with it to an employee, then follow these 6 steps. So you can print that out if you are giving feedback and go through it. And just move on to the next one. So we're looking at retention of employees in this current climate. So what motivates employees, and I've kept it brief in terms of what to look at in this current climate. What I would recommend is focus on the little big things. What do I mean by that? It's something that might seem quite small to the organisation at present. The ship is rocking, you're trying to steady it, but it's a major big thing for an employee. It could be looking at individuals' annual leave. For example, they may not be able to take annual leave at present. They could be either temporarily laid off, or half the other workforces, or they're working from home. It's not feasible. Look at that, speak to your employees and communicate with them. Look at those. Oftentimes we're asked, is it money that motivates individuals? That is a factor, but it's not the primary factor. Ensure that you're looking at flexible working practices, looking at maybe working from home on a longer term basis, look at your annual leave policy. Those are the types of things that are going to retain individuals. So you mightn't have much cash to look at pay increases or large amount of remuneration, but there's a lot of other things that you can do that actually rank higher than that at present. And just lastly, the last thing we look at is the recruitment of employees. So I know that mightn't be something that a lot of organisations are faced with at present, but if it is something that you're looking at, review the job offer and what attracts those employees. It doesn't have to be a major salary. The salary isn't actually the primary motivator. It's that time off, what's your working policy, what's your working practices, the culture of the organisation. And interviews can be done via video conference, and there is no problem from an employment law perspective of doing video interviews at this time. Perfect. So I think we're just at the time now. So if there are any questions, I can answer them at the end.
That's great. Thank you so much, Martina. I think that was really useful for all of us in terms of just some of those tips as well. I know there's another couple of slides there, and I think we will get to it probably in the Q&A around the furlocking process and things. So we will be able to take some questions on that. If people want to start popping stuff up into the Q&A, we can do that. So I'd now like to introduce our lovely panel. So I'm going to come to them one by one, ask them to do a little introduction to themselves, and then we're going to have I'll have some questions here for each of them. So I'm going to remind them to unmute their mic whenever they're talking. So I'm going to start with Tara Simpson. Tara's from Instil, one of our member companies on campus in Titanic Quarter. So Tara, do you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Hi folks, I'm Tara. I'm Managing Director of Instil Software. We are a software consultancy based in Adelaide Street in Belfast, and we provide product-focused engineering services to companies globally and also training to companies globally as well. So we've been impacted by this to some degree, which I can probably go into. We've had sort of a plus side, but we've also had a negative side as well, which we can go into.
Okay, thanks, Tara. And then Rachel. Rachel's from one of our partner, Catalyst partners, Carson McDowell. So Rachel, do you want to do a little bit of an introduction?
Yep, my name's Rachel Penny. I'm one of the partners in the employment team at Carson McDowell. We're the largest law firm in Northern Ireland. We have 170 staff, all of whom, except the post guys, all of whom are currently remote working. And this is, for some of our staff, solicitors are used to a little bit of home working, but very, very many of our staff have never worked from home before and are just getting to grips with it all.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. And then I'm going to introduce Jonathan. Jonathan, you're normally based up in our northwest, but you're currently in Belfast.
Yes.
Do you want to give us a wee bit of an introduction to you and what you do?
So I'm Jonathan Black, co-founder and CFO of Bloception Limited. We're basically a game design company that works in partnership with Microsoft, producing content for Minecraft. We've been fully remote for about 4.5 years, so our workflow's not changed at all. And as one can guess, with all kids off school, the games industry is as strong as it's ever been. It's basically Christmas at the minute, so we're in definitely quite obscure position at the minute, to say the least.
So John, yeah, we're looking forward to hearing, because you've been doing this for a long time. I think we can all probably learn a lot. And Michael, so Michael was actually one of our Invent finalists last year, so it's great to see him. So Michael, do you want to do a wee bit of an introduction to you and what you do?
Yeah, sure. I'm Michael Blakley, co-founder of Equitas. So we help companies make better, less biased hiring decisions with our digital interview platform. So not dissimilar to Jonathan, we've been quite remote. We are based in the Ormeau Baths normally, but back and forth with London. We have developers working in northeast of England for us, and we've used freelancers globally before. So yeah, similar situation in that people are looking to go digital at the minute. So it's a crazy situation for us as well.
So, and Michael's actually in London at the minute, aren't you, rather than back home? So. Yeah,
lockdown in London.
Lockdown in London. So, so Tara, I'll come to you first. Do you want to tell us a bit about how you're managing to work remotely, that switch over, what the challenges have been, what are the kind of tools, techniques you're using, and how are you dealing with things overall?
Sure. As a software company, we've actually been working remotely, but in an office for the last 10 years. We just didn't realize it until the switch got turned off a couple of weeks ago. So everything that we do as a company, everything that we deliver and how we deliver it and all the tools that we use, they're essentially online tools. So when it came to making the decision just over 2 weeks ago, we literally, the only thing we had to do was make a telephone call to our telephone provider to get the call switched through to one of our admin assistants. And that's the only thing we had to do. Otherwise, we were straight over. And also, I think culturally, we've had long-term, we've had a work-from-home policy that's been reasonably supportive of people's lives outside of the business. So the trust among the staff and the trust all the way up the organisation has been there. I think I'm hearing stories of organisations struggling with this, or individuals within organisations struggling with this, wanting to check in on people, make sure they're working and doing all those things. We don't have any of that. That's just written into our cultural rule book from day one. But we've been doing this for a long time, so we're quite comfortable with it. I know as a boss initially, I was working occasionally for some of my customers. It still takes a while as a boss to get used to people working from home, but you get over it very quickly, particularly when they're delivering. And invariably people do actually work harder. And the first thing we called out was that immediately we recognised that with just parents, and we've got about 50% of our staff are parents, your day is going to be fragmented. Just roll with it. That's okay. You don't have to work 9 to 5. If you have to make up the hours later in the day, or you make them up later in another day, all of that is fine. So we made it very clear from the start that this is going to be difficult for everyone, and we're all, including myself, in the same boat. So right from the get-go, just roll with it. We're in this together. But in terms of home working, we've switched over pretty quickly. I would say in terms of the tools, the number one tool that I think we use is probably Slack, which is a messaging platform. And it's just great for banter, great for messaging, great for just getting things across. We've got a couple of channels that have opened up in this that are just essentially there for this crisis, to just have a bit of fun, have people chatting about things. But there's always just banter and so on going in those channels as well. So it's pretty good. The other thing that we're doing is I'm finding myself communicating more than I've ever done with the staff. So people are anxious, and even though we are in a good position, they are still anxious, and they're looking around them and they're seeing what else is happening in the world, and they're seeing companies furloughing staff, and they're seeing people being laid off. So it's really important that so what I've done personally is I've let them know what work in progress we've got, which I think they all know, what work in the pipeline that we've got, and also what our cash position is like as well. So we were able to reassure them essentially over the next 8 months that that things are going to be fine, but also that this is a really momentous time as well, and to be really realistic about the way the world is going. None of us can be certain where things are going to be in 6 months or 8 months as we try to exit out of this crisis. So it's to be open, but also to be realistic to them as well. But there's no doubt people are anxious, but the feedback I'm getting is that they're delighted to be informed constantly, and that's really reassuring for them. So, but in terms of the tools, yes, Slack, we're using all the video stuff that everyone else has been using as well. We're also asking staff to take turns actually in releasing, and we're just doing this from Monday, to release like a daily buzz. So they take a turn essentially of releasing things that are news that are important to them, or parts of their life that might be important. So I'm going to do the first one on Monday, and again, it's just getting a bit more into making it personal among our staff.
Very good. That's good to hear. Yeah, Slack's been one of our main things as well over the last few years. So it has been, and there's some, as you say, some good stuff as well in terms of the channels. So that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Rachel, I'll come to you. I'm sure it has been a busy time. So I suppose for us, what's the most frequently asked things that you're getting at the minute? I suppose as well for smaller companies, what are the things they're really having to think about in terms of their employment law and their legal position on things?
Well, I think we've seen a bit of a curve, I suppose, not unlike the progress of this awful disease. In the very early weeks, we had lots and lots of questions about absence from work and what sick leave and sick pay was payable. Then we started to get lots of questions about redundancies and layoff. And really then, since the government introduced or announced the job retention scheme, we've been absolutely flat out advising on the job retention scheme, which has been a big challenge because obviously normally employment legislation is introduced with quite a long lead time and a lot of consultation about it. This was just, as you would understand and appreciate in the circumstances, this was just dropped on everybody. Very welcome drop, I have to say, but just dropped on everybody, and we're all getting to grips with it. I mean, for a few weeks, my advice to clients has been, there's no rule book for this. I don't know the answer. Please don't quote me on this tomorrow because it's probably changed again tomorrow. But we are now beginning to get to grips with it. I saw some statistics on the news last night about the numbers of people who have been furloughed in Northern Ireland. There was some reference to 17,000. I would say that is a drop in the ocean compared to what we will get in time. So that's been keeping us really, really busy. There's still obviously a lot of questions out there about the job retention scheme. Very happy to answer any if people upload them on the Q&A. But just a couple of points in terms of how we're reacting as a business. As I said, lawyers aren't known for embracing change. We're often wedded to the office and the desk. We're very paper intensive. So this has been a huge challenge. And I think, if anything good comes out of this, it will definitely encourage us to embrace newer ways of working. Carson McDowell is very flexible, and I think that's why we've been able to go to entirely remote working. I wouldn't say easily, but quickly within the space of a week or two. And we've all now been remote working for the best part of nearly 3 weeks. So, but I think some good could come out of this in terms of how maybe the more traditional professions and jobs, how they actually operate.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. We're going to come to Jonathan, and Jonathan is, just so you know, he has this video on for a reason, so we're going to hear Jonathan. So Jonathan, you were saying earlier that you've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
You work remotely all the time. So you're probably more used to this than any of us. So what can you tell us as your top tips? What are the things, the tools that you can share?
Yeah, because we've been round the block with tools. We've used a bit of everything over the years. At the minute, I think, well, obviously, surprise, surprise, Slack is used a bit, but we surprisingly for voice communications, we'd use Discord. Now, Discord would be more of a free version of Slack, but it's more accessible to our subcontractors around the world. Slack will be a much more corporate sort of software. So in our industry, Discord would be more commonly used, but we'd use Slack for sort of messaging and all that there, but we'd use Discord for VoIP and screen sharing. At the core of our business, we'd use Google Drive. So that would be where we do all our file sharing and transferring, and it's very just essential to our productivity. So that includes Google Docs, Google Sheets, all that there, so we can all work together on the same tasks. We would use Trello for to-do lists and basically project management. So you have Trello's a sort of software. You've basically got, it's like post-it notes, and it's just little small tasks, and people can assign themselves to them and check stuff off as it gets done. And then finally, most recently, we're using a bit of software called Notion. And we would use it for all our documentation. And the good thing about Notion is as well that it integrates with our Google Drive and our Trello. In the past, we used Confluence, but it was a bit just heavy duty for what we needed. Yeah. So
how do you, I mean, in terms of keeping in touch with staff, you're kind of well used to that as well. So, I mean, how do you manage that, I suppose, as well, and manage those expectations of what people need to be working on?
And how to manage it without coming across like you're micromanaging, because a key issue of remote working is having confidence in your employees and assuming that they're going to actually do the work and fill in the hours. A big problem we've seen in the past is that there's like that lack of trust between the hierarchy, and that managers would be down people's necks going, oh, you're not online, you're not doing this, but in reality they are doing it. It's just a different working environment, culture, and some people just cannot adjust to it really, and especially micromanagement's always been an issue, at least not on our end. But we'd have the unique scenario that we've got subcontractors, like 55 now, and they're based from West Coast America to Australia, Estonia, Iraq, and everywhere in between, UK obviously. So lining up time zones and all that's always been issues with communication.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan.
No problem.
Michael, we know kind of from talking to our members over the last wee while that some people are still trying to recruit in this. And that's really positive for them, but they're finding it quite difficult still. And recruitment for a lot of those posts was always, it was always difficult enough it is. But kind of in your experience, and you've a wealth of recruitment experience as well, what are the things to do, particularly when you're doing it through difficult times, and how can you do it, but also then how do you manage not having that face-to-face, I suppose, traditional interview that we would normally do, and all of those processes? How do you switch that online?
Yeah, it's a tough time at the minute, Karen. Great question. So every part of the process has to be done remotely, from like attraction right through to onboarding. I will try and give you lots of tips and a few different tools, because it's always good to have practical steps that you can take straight away. So on the attraction and sourcing side of it, Martina touched on job roles and description, and that's awesome, that's vital. On the recruitment side of things, you need to tailor your job adverts for the current environment. So don't just copy and paste. I've seen some shockers already about exciting times, booming fintech market left in there by mistake. So put in things like remote working, completely remote role, remote onboarding, and start dates. I've been speaking to a few people back in the market in around Belfast, and people are guessing. They're just saying maybe not till May, June. Just be honest and say when you think it's going to be, and that's a really good start. And like Jonathan is doing at the minute, there's people in industries who are going to be booming, but be tactful the way that you say it. It's super difficult times, but there's growing demand. We don't want to let our customers down. Things like that to start with. In terms of where to post those, there's free resources at the minute. So there's things like stillhiring.io, which is amazing. It's in London, but it's for UK roles, remote roles, and they're just collating every single company that's still out there hiring at the minute. So I'll share that with everyone afterwards. There's also Google Hire wrote an article on 50 free job posting sites, which is amazing for some of the smaller companies in your community who don't want to spend at this stage, but still have roles to fill. So there's 50 free ones. It takes a lot of time to go through and sign up to them and get posting, but you can get some really good traction on your job roles. One that I've heard recently, which was quite ingenious, was setting up Google Alerts. So there is going to be redundancies, and there will be all over Northern Ireland, Belfast. So if you're actively hiring and have a lot of roles to fill, just set up a Google alert that says redundancies in Belfast, and any time an organisation in your sector might close down, you can go in there, you can start to help their staff and reach out proactively straight away, because if you're a startup or scale up, they might not have ever heard of you before as well. So it's a great way to reach out and be proactive on it. And the last one on the attraction and sort of screening side that I heard of, which was amazing, is talent sharing. So for instance, Aldi, who I used to work for, and McDonald's now have a signed agreement. McDonald's have shut down all their restaurants. Aldi are busier, they need the staff. And it's in that agreement there that they have to go back and can't switch over after they have to wait 18 plus months before they can move across to Aldi if they loved it. So talent sharing is going to be key among the smaller companies within the Catalyst community and across Northern Ireland. If you are a bigger enterprise kind of brand and you've got great social media, some of your face-to-face programs are dropping off, what you need to do is do virtual recruitment open days. Now, I know it sounds complex and a big task, but the tool that I would use for that is called hopin.to, which is also being used for a lot of different conferences. And again, I'll share that afterwards, but it's an amazing tool. And they're one of the ones who are doing that advertising where they're like, we need to hire 20 different roles at the minute because the amount of sales we have coming through and everyone wants to go virtual, we need new staff. But in terms of a virtual open day, you can have a lot of your staff on there in different separate rooms. You can give a keynote speech at the start of the day, introducing everyone to the company. And it doesn't have to be long, 45 minutes, an hour. And you can really engage with a lot of people who you might not be able to see with your normal style recruitment open days. And the last one I'll try and quickly touch on, going remote with the interview and assessment process. You don't have to spend money on tools. There's ways to do it for free. Some of the ones Jonathan mentioned, like Trello to manage the candidate flow, that works absolutely fine. You can use what we're using, Zoom, Teams. I love to use Whereby. It's an amazing one and a little bit more secure than the other two as well. If you do want collaborative sort of hiring and interview tools, which manage the process a little bit more, you will have to start spending at that stage. But there's lots of different sort of video interview assessment center tools, lots of different ways of doing it. And anyone who wants like my recommendations or which companies to go and chat to afterwards, just feel free to reach out. And the last thing I'd say is don't cut corners. You see these articles about Tesco and people going in and having a 1-minute job interview. Don't do that. I know you might be desperate to get staff in if you're super busy, but keep a robust, structured process and actually vet the people. And I know it is hard to say no at this stage if you're desperate for 5-6 hires, but go back to those attraction, get that funnel coming through and have an actual structured process in place. And there's so many tools that can help you do it remotely as well.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Michael. So we've got a few Q&A coming up here. So I am just going to go to some of them now. I know some of them have been answered. So yeah, so any advice beyond what's already been said on how to onboard new employees that are now maybe starting? So obviously we can't bring them into the office. So what are the thoughts around that in terms of how maybe you would onboard somebody and bring them on? Martina, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so as long as, you know, you cover off what you would traditionally do, you can do the onboarding via a platform such as this, go through their contract of employment, send that to the individual in advance with their job description, and go through the induction as you normally would. Okay, you're not going to do an orientation of a building, but you can go through a lot remotely. So I would say go through, set up a video call with them, take them through their terms and conditions, answer any questions that they may have, give them clarity on the job description, on the job role, and then look at how would you normally induct them into the role. You'd spend time every day training them, so spend that time with them. This is how we do it. You can do screen shares. There's amazing stuff that you can do with technology in terms of screen sharing and showing individuals how to actually how you actually operate. So an induction plan, send it to the employee with their terms and conditions.
Okay, and one of the other things that had come up about something I was chatting to somebody the other day was that, you know, obviously you're not able to, it's very difficult to get kit to people and things. So what is the line about how you can get people to use their own equipment, or what, how do you manage that? So Rachel, I don't know whether there's something from a legal perspective in that as well, or do you want to unmute, Rachel? Sorry.
There we go. Sorry, lawyers and technology. Are there any legal? I mean, potentially yes, from a GDPR and confidentiality perspective. You know, if people are using their own equipment, you'd want to make sure that it's secure and that, you know, the risk of leaks or hacks or breaches of confidentiality, that would be my primary concern there. But otherwise, I mean, yeah, of course, recruitment and onboarding is going to be different and a challenge, but there's no doubt that there's the tools there available to make it work.
I think from a technology point of view, I think companies should be providing equipment for the staff, yeah, for security. So all our tools, all our online systems, they're all two-factor authentication. Essentially, to do that, we have password lockers installed in all our machines, but also we have additional security things installed on our machines as well. So we won't have anybody using their home computer for anything essentially on our virtual network at all. They might do some stuff on their home computer, but they need to be provided with a secure laptop.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And this was another one around furlough. And maybe if you want to take that, Rachel. People are saying okay at the minute, but what happens if I need to furlough further down the line? Can employees be furloughed at any time?
Yeah, so currently the job retention scheme, the government has said it's going to be open and available until the 31st of May. Whether or not it extends the scheme, I suppose, will depend on how we're all doing in terms of the progress and transmission rates of the disease. I think there is an expectation that it's likely to be extended, but certainly no guarantees of that. But yes, I mean, the window of the scheme presently is from the 1st of March until the 31st of May. You can put employees on furlough at any point. The minimum furlough period has to be at least 3 weeks. You can rotate people in and out of furlough periods, provided you're at each rotation, it's at least 3 weeks. The important thing to remember is that furlough is essentially a change to your employees' terms and conditions and contracts of employment, and you will need to get their agreement. And you'll need to get their agreement to two things. Number one, to be furloughed. And number two, if you're dropping their pay to that 80% or 2,500 cap, which is what you will be able to be reimbursed from HMRC, then that drop in pay will also need to be the subject of specific agreement with your employees.
Okay, thank you. And there's another one specifically for you, Rachel. So is there a risk that companies might find claims questioned at time of claim, RE pay amounts and eligibility once presumed rules of the JRS scheme become clearer near the time of going live in April? And what do they do then if you already used the JRS scheme?
So the, for the benefit of others, obviously this person who's asked the question is clued in. So there's still a lot of, there's some known knowns and there's some unknown knowns, and then there's unknown unknowns about this scheme. It has been, as I said, introduced at very, very short notice and without a lot of detail, which we're working our way through and getting greater clarity on, but still a lot of unanswered questions. And one of those is exactly where the parameters of this scheme is. Is it open to all employers, or is it only open to employers to use in certain circumstances? So for instance, initially the government statements seemed to link entitlement and eligibility to a real risk of redundancy or layoff. Now that's possibly extended a little bit. The most recent pronouncements from the government is talking about businesses whose operations have been severely impacted by COVID, but we don't know, whose interpretation of severely impacted is it? So we don't really know yet. And then we've got some employers who are taking some questionable decisions, perhaps not entirely in keeping with the spirit of the scheme. And I do think for those people who are pushing the boundaries, there's a risk that you furlough, you then seek to claim the 80% back, and HMRC, which has reserved the right to come and audit all of this after the event, might say, no, that was an inappropriate use of the scheme and you've got to repay that money. So yes, there is a risk.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. So this one maybe for Jonathan, then you probably have maybe had to deal with this.
Okay.
So what do you do if one of your contractors or gig workers has to self-isolate or become sick? I don't know whether you've had to deal with that or...
Well, touch wood, we haven't yet, but
okay.
If we did, well, the good thing is they're not going to be in contact with our other employees or contractors, so that's from the bat a good thing. But what would we do? I guess you just take it as it comes. Let them isolate, like the way things are at the minute. So a lot of our subcontractors actually worked other jobs and they're actually isolating from their other jobs and working for us more. So we'd find that they nearly work for us in their free time. Would I say it affects our operations? Not as such, but I think, yeah, it's case by case, basically.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a clear answer to it.
Okay, no worries. So yeah, one of the other things here is, what happened, and this has also been
I can't interrupt. I think just that last question, I think there are some HR guidance around that as well. So government advice around, essentially they're covered from a sick pay point of view. And there's some stuff on our website, I think, and others as well regarding that as well. So there's another one here about how companies who have individuals on 0-hour contracts or low pay, how that would work. Martina, I think I've seen some info on one of your slides about this, was it?
Yeah, they are covered by the scheme if they are on a 0 hours contract. So it does, the scheme provides for full-time, part-time, all contract types. So if you do have individuals on a 0 hour contract, they are covered as long as they were on the payroll at the 28th of February.
Okay, thank you.
And just to add to that, sorry to cut across, what the government has said as to how you calculate the 80% for those 0 hours workers is that you either look back to the equivalent month last year, if they were engaged with you on that basis this time last year, or if they weren't, then you look at the average of the pay they've received in this tax year.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So somebody else here is excuse me, got a cough. Furloughed employer who's still on probation, been with them less than 6 months, not likely to need the role going forward. How do you handle that in terms of, is it a straightforward termination? So Rachel, do you want to maybe advice on that?
I think my response to that would depend on why you're not likely to need the role or the person going forward. If it's because they were proving unsuitable for the role already, then my inclination would be, well, apply your normal processes, and if you would not have passed that person's probation, well, then you bring that contract to an end, remembering always that the magic mark for unfair dismissal rights is 1 year. If the reason you don't need that job at the moment is in any way related to COVID, I think you would be entitled to furlough that person and then resurrect their probationary period if there's a role. When we get out of this and people are back working normally, whatever normal is. So I think I'd be guided by what's the reason you don't need the role.
Okay, thank you very much. One of the other things that come up, and this is maybe something, Michael, you can help with your experience. I was chatting to somebody the other day. They were wondering about, can they record online interviews, and how can they, as a record, or what's the best way to do that? Can they do that? And yeah.
So yeah, they can do it as long as they get consent from the candidate. And like best practice, what I've always said to people is tell them up front so they're not shocked when they get on there on a video call, whatever, or whatever software that you're using to do the interview, and then make sure that you confirm it again during that time, just to make sure that they're okay. If they opt out and sort of say, actually, you know what, I've changed my mind, I don't want this to be recorded, just say to them, like, that's absolutely fine, we'll turn the audio recording off, but I'm going to have to go back to the old fashioned way of sitting here writing, taking down notes. So just to let you know, interview might run a little bit longer, and then that way, everyone's happy and you've still got some sort of record to file away. In terms of holding on to the recordings, if they're unsuccessful, the longest that you can hold on to them is for up to 12 months. But my best advice is to, as long as you're not going to go back in and do any sort of data analysis on them or look at the what's been said or anonymize it, then it's just to get rid of them after a couple of months at the absolute most for the audio, as long as you've got it transcribed afterwards, as long as there's some sort of record for the rest of those 12 months.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And then another question there, and it was again something that came up, and it's maybe a slight worry for people. So somebody has been furloughed and they go and work for another company. So they take up a contract. So some people are worried about that when they're having to furlough staff, and they're going, am I going to lose them to other companies? And then on the flip side of that, some people that are looking for staff, how would they employ somebody who was furloughed? And it was interesting what we were saying about what you said about Aldi and McDonald's, that kind of sharing, Michael. It was interesting. There's some people in the community are working to look at some of those things as well. But just maybe Rachel, from a contract point of view, or what your thoughts on that are?
We've had this question quite a lot, actually, from clients, and particularly clients, and I appreciate it's not exactly your sector, clients in the agri-food sector. So they are working their production at way over 100%, but their absence levels from people who are self-isolating are obviously dropping, and they're concerned that to be able to continue to meet those production demands. And so there was an idea that they could effectively borrow or second or share staff from some of those industries, retail, hospitality, and so on, that had been most impacted. There's still a question mark over it. So the job retention scheme says that the employee on furlough cannot do any work for his or her employer or any employer associated with. So couldn't work within a group, for example. But it doesn't say anything about second jobs and what is the impact on furlough and on the ability to recoup the 80%. If that person goes and gets a second job. Interestingly, now I'm not sure I would classify this as legal advice, but there was a tweet, somebody asked this question to HMRC customer service Twitter account yesterday, and the response came back, said, it's fine, take your second job, provided that it's not a breach of your employment contract. So obviously you wouldn't want to furlough an employee for them to go and work for a competitor, for instance, but you might be quite happy for them to get a job, helping out at Tesco, stacking shelves, so I think the answer, we're getting greater clarity. I think it's okay to get a second job, but you'll need to check your contracts of employment to make sure they're not working for a competitor or breaching any other provision.
Okay. Anybody else? Any thoughts on that? Or Tara?
Yeah, I was speaking to a well-known hotelier recently, and he's really keen to get a lot of his furlough staff onto short-term contracts elsewhere, because the cost of actually having to rehire people is so great, and it's so difficult to find the people that he's spent years building up. So this is, as an option to him as an employer, is we were talking about this several weeks ago before the JRS had come through. So it's I think, yeah, if people can find a second job and it helps your current employer,
yeah,
and get us through, I think, go forward.
There were some really great examples of businesses before, particularly before the furlough scheme was announced, some great local examples of businesses buddying up together to help them get through the peaks and the troughs. But that kind of tailed off. I mean, I've got one client in particular who was looking for hundreds of jobs extra in the food production sector, and they buddied up with a hospitality sector, and they had 500 applications in a very short period of time. And then the furlough scheme was announced, and about 95% of the people who'd expressed an interest dropped out. It is an issue, and I think the government's going to have to give a bit more thought to it.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm just very conscious of time here. I'm going to maybe ask you all just to maybe do one final comment in terms of the working from home and managing that. You know, one of the questions that we're kind of getting quite a bit is, how do you look after people's health and well-being and mental health and well-being during this time? So maybe ask each of you maybe just do one comment on that.
I would go with social interaction as much as possible, even though it's remote social interaction. You can see even from the videos here we have today, it makes it a lot more personable when you can see people, so that personal interaction really can help.
Okay, thanks. Jonathan, what are your thoughts?
Definitely, as much as you can, try and have some form of separation from work and while you're home. I'm very fortunate to have at least a home office, but whatever you do, just don't work in the same place you sleep. It's just for mental well-being. Otherwise, you'll not be able to switch off, and especially if we're in this for a few months or whatever, this separation is so essential to having a clean mindset and being able to switch off as soon as you leave the room or whatever. Okay,
thank you. Rachel?
Back to social interaction, we've introduced Friday evening drinks for our team, where we jump on some form of video platform at about 5:45, and we take half an hour and the work chat's banned, and we have a drink and a bit of crack, and that's so far that's working well.
Cool. Michael?
I'd second the remote beers on a Friday. And quizzes. I've never done more quizzes with my friends than the last space of 2 or 3 weeks. And there's, again, good tools. Kahoot is amazing for designing your own quizzes, and people really get into it.
Cool. Tara, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, we do very similar things. So Friday drinks and quizzes. I do one thing, I guess call it leading from the front, but I make it very clear to folks that I'm going out for a run, and I say it loud and proud, and I ask people, what are you doing today? And we all ask each other, so we're pushing each other just to stay active and get out. So I think for me, for mindfulness, exercise is probably top of my list. So, but everyone knows, just get out and do your best on top of everything else.
Yeah, use those exercise tokens.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, well, thank you so much to the panel. I'm quite conscious on time. Just so everybody knows, what we're going to do is we'll put a MP3 of this up along with Martina's slide deck. She's very kindly agreed for us to be able to share that. I think there's one question there left remaining, but we'll get an answer to that and pop it up and put it up there. Just in terms from a Catalyst point of view, we know that this was one of the topics that came up whenever we were talking to people over the last couple of weeks that there was a struggle with or people needed answers on. So, you know, we're very much saying, please do reach out to us with anything that you need to. We have an email address, which is community@wearecatalyst.org. So you can pop anything through to there. We will pick up on it. Apart from, I think our email servers are something's happening at 4 o'clock to them, but we'll pick it up later on. So yeah, there's I know we talked about some of the recruitment stuff. I just wanted to mention that the hub.io is still there as a free recruitment tool as well. Patrick, who looks after that's part of our relationship with Danske, is there to support people as well if people do have jobs that they need to go up. We're also going to be sharing some mental health and wellbeing stuff through our channels over the next wee while, because we know that's really important. And the job retention scheme, you know, if people still do have questions on that or they need clarity, please ping them through to us, and we'll try and get you that support from throughout the community. It's great that we have such a brilliant community who can support each other during this, and it's been so good to see that people are sharing and developing not just resources but relationships and really helping each other out. So thank you so much to everybody. Also want to thank the behind the scenes, so Trudy and Paul and a few other from the Catalyst team who helped put all this together, and John for being my standby in case my Wi-Fi dropped off. So thanks so much. We'll keep you posted on what we'll be doing next in terms of webinars and other content, so keep an eye on the newsletters and things. So thank you, have a great weekend, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.